Alright, so we're going to clean up this character here that we have using some of the healing tools that we have in Photoshop. Right now I'm using Photoshop CS 5.1, but I'm pretty sure in any other later versions that you have out there, you can always watch and do the same thing. Remember, it's all about technique, right? Not so much the package or the software. As long as the tools are available, use them. Alright, so first things first, I always like to make sure that my the original image is not manipulated. That way I always have something to refer back to. So you kind of want to have a before and an after image. Okay? So I've duplicated this by pressing Ctrl J or Command J if you have a Mac. And we're just going to be using a few of the different tools that we have out there. So I'm going to show you quite a bit of tools that you can use to do cleanup. And one of the tools that we'll be looking at is the Spot Healing Brush tool. Now, it's not a matter of just using one tool solely to do all the work, but it's always sometimes using a combination of tools and techniques in order to get the work done. So if we look at this character, we have the Spot Healing Brush. Now what this brush does is that based on what you have, when you click, essentially, let me just choose a spot and you can see without much explanation. I click a spot and poof, it magically disappears. So essentially what it does, because I have done content aware, it looks at what I have. Based on what's around, it's going to try and basically plaster another image or a part of the image somewhere. So look at this really large one here, right? You just click. It's a spot healing brush. It's just going to target the spots and hit them and change them, right? So I'm just going to go around and do that. Heal a few of those face parts here. Just get some stuff out. So that's a spot healing brush. You can just watch and see me zap those areas out. Now there's more than just that. There also is, and one thing to be cautious of with the spot healing brush, it's not meant for large areas. So if I were to take this whole face and say, okay, kind of just want to quickly do this and just be over with it, and I click, what's going to happen is going to process a little longer because it's one big giant spot now. And so it's going to analyze the image, yeah, and kind of just scar the face right there. Because what it's really doing is looking in the whole image and seeing any areas that could probably fit. And sometimes you get some really choppy results. Right, so it's best to keep that one small, a small area to work with. Click that area, right? All right, maybe this part isn't working out too well for you. Maybe you're starting to notice the blotches. Let's look at the before and after so far. So what we have right now is something looking like this is the before and this is the after. Now you can almost see it's like you're seeing those little spots now and they're becoming a little bit more clear. So I'm going to try another tool. We have the healing brush tool, which works quite like the spot healing brush, except this time you can actually, well, brush on new texture or new skin. All right, so here it says Alt click to define a source point to be used to repair the image. So I'm going to press OK. So I press Alt click. Where I'm going to click is somewhere clear. So example here, this cheek part, it has texture. It also has color. I'm going to click on that as my source image and kind of just paint on some skin there. And same thing for here, just paint on back the proper tones, right? And then just brush that on here. That is the healing brush tool. You have to be very cautious of the tool that you're using because overuse of it can make things look quite apparent. See, if I start brushing on a nose, it's going to start doing weird things like putting in a nose where it's not supposed to be. So it's almost like it works like the clone stamp brush, which you can use to clone certain areas that you missed. But the healing brush isn't doing too bad a job, so I'll just kind of work with it a little bit here and there, right? Just to make sure that I kind of just tidy up those areas that look kind of, weird. So let's look again. So it's starting to look like it's coming together, kinda. I'm going to take now the patch tool. Now here's how the patch tool works. I can select an area that I want to kind of repair, example here, and kind of just drag it somewhere else. And what it does, it just puts on a new texture on top of the skin tone. So for example, I might have blemishes up here, right? So let's say that's part of the face, and I kind of want a smoother part of the face there. Now we just take a bit of it and just change that image there. Now you can almost notice that even though I'm zooming in quite a bit, you notice that this becomes a blotch because it's almost like because of what we call depth of field. Here it looks a little bit more fuzzy than here. So when it takes on that texture or that tone, you're losing the texture of the actual thing. So it's good to choose areas that have a good texture, and you can maintain that quality there. So I'll just highlight this area, pull this down, and just tweak it a little bit. Just highlight that area again, tweak it a little bit, and move things around as I see fit. Right? Just highlight this area again, move that all the way, maybe here as well. Just highlight little blotches and just do those things. Now it almost looks like he's went for acne treatment and it's kind of working. But then you have some areas that actually have that brown. Now in cases like these, there's a little bit more you have to do because you want to even out that skin tone, right? And in cases like these, you do something called frequency separation, which essentially preserves the texture of the skin and separates it from the tone of the skin so that you are able to change the tone without losing the texture of the skin. It's what we call an advanced retouching technique. But essentially, if you look at graduation pictures that you see come out and they look so much cleaner than the actual person's face, they use some frequency separation to do that. Yes. Now let's see if we can actually fix this up a little bit more. But we won't be using frequency separation just yet. I'll save that for another video. Alright, so this is our before and after. It doesn't look too bad, but we want to even out the skin tones. And one of the ways we can do that is by using an adjustment layer. And here's how adjustment layers work. I'm going to select this face, and there are certain areas I kind of just want to target. Like, for example, these brown areas that look kind of blotchy. You kind of want to just keep them even in terms of the skin tone. So I can go to my adjustment layer, and you have things like curves, or you can use the color balance. And what that does is it allows me to highlight certain areas. So for example, let's say I want to target these brown areas here. Just to kind of, so I'm going to use my lasso tool and just kind of select some areas here, just about there, right? And because that area is selected, I'm just going to invert that area to create a mask for it. But for the color balance, I have options here for shadows, highlights, and midtones. And I can always change, for example, the values of the reds. So if I want one particular area to be more red than the other. So for example, for my midtones, if you want it more red or less red, right, you can always desaturate that or increase the green if you want to be more green or less. But what you're trying to really do is just kind of flatten it out so it's not too red and kind of almost desaturate it in a bit. So before and after, it's barely visible, but there's just a subtle difference. And the same thing you can do here as well. I'm just gonna change my feathering to 0 and highlight that area there and kind of just work with that. Just trying to just zap out those areas that have the high reds. Right, and if this isn't working out too well for me, I can always play with highlights as well. Right, so if the highlights are too red and you kind of just want to make it a little bit more well preserved, you can always tweak these settings. And we're dealing with RGB, which we did in the lecture before. We're talking about red, green, and blue. You're just playing around with those, and you have also cyan, magenta, and yellow. You can always play with. So, and then you have something looking like that, right? And that's an adjustment. So if we were to group, for example, this one, and I'm going to highlight those and press Ctrl G, you can show what your previous was, and this one is your finished result, right? So that's before and after, and that's how you can do your image cleanup. There's multiple ways you could actually do this. For example, in this particular image we did before, we have befores and after. So this was the before and this is the after, right? In this one we use frequency separation to kind of just erase some of that extra blotches there and kind of add some things to the parts of the body and such, and even change the eye color. So that's one thing you could do, right, with this one. So let's see what you come up with, and have a good one.